I'm Gemma Gillam and I'm leading on Kinship Care for Family for Every Child. Just a reminder that there'll be a series of presentations today followed by a Q&A section. So if you do have any questions that come up through the presentations, please put your questions into the Q&A box and we'll come around to them at the end of the presentations today. So to kick off today's session, there'll be an opening poll that should come up on your screens. Please just take a minute to complete that. Great, so welcome to our fifth in a series of webinars. These have been monthly webinars running on kinship care and they carry on until July or August of this year. The webinars are taking place in parallel to the development of the global interagency guidance on kinship care, which is being led by Family for Every Child. Today's webinar series will be looking at the role of kinship carers in supporting kinship care. Family for Every Child is a global alliance of 46 local civil society organisations in 38 countries. A little bit of background on how we've got to where we are today. In 2019, Family commissioned research on kinship care, which showed that this vital form of care and protection for children is widely neglected around the world. This publication, The Paradox of Kinship Care, which should be being shared in the chat box now, made a strong case for greater investment in kinship care. The guidance that we're currently developing and the webinar series now seek to demonstrate how to effectively support kinship care. If you'd like to get involved in the development of the guidance or in the broader work that we're doing on kinship care, you can do so by joining the Kinship Care group on Changemakers for Children. Again, a link for this platform should be being shared in the chat. On this platform, we regularly share updates and opportunities to input and to comment on the guidance, and we'll also publish the guidance there in September of this year. As I said, in this webinar, we'll be looking at how kinship carers themselves support kinship care. So our panelists today include Katerina Nick-Vuris, founder of Kinship Care Ireland. Katerina is a parent of 2 and a kinship carer of her 4 orphan nieces. As a kinship carer herself, she has insight into the difficult challenges many kinship care families face. With skills and experience in community development, family support, and child bereavement, she founded Kinship Care Ireland in 2019 through a supportive partnership with Trenoir, a national organisation that supports modern families. We also have with us today Blessing Mutama, the Executive Director of FOST in Zimbabwe and a seasoned development practitioner with over 20 years experience. He sits on a number of boards at the local, regional and international level and is currently a trustee and vice board chair of Family for Every Child. We also have with us Subrata Jana, a professional child protection social worker and who works as a program manager for YCDA in India and is currently managing their child protection and foster care programs. And finally, we have Emily Delap from Child Frontiers. Many of you will now be very familiar with Emily Delap, as she's been leading on the research and the development of the global interagency guidance. To kick off today, we're going to start with Emily Delap, who's going to be sharing with us some of the findings from the research and the development of the guidance. Emily, over to you. Oh, Emily, we can't hear you.
Thanks, Gemma. Sorry. Can you move on to the next slide, if possible, please? So I'm just going to talk very briefly, based on the findings from the research we did around the guidance about how kinship carers can contribute to efforts to support kinship care and why these contributions are so important. So just first of all to say that in this webinar, we're really focusing on the role of kinship carers, but we do recognise that many of the principles and lessons learned that we're talking about today could also apply to involving children in kinship care, in policy development or the design of programmes or in support to kinship care families. And we think it's really important to involve both children and kinship carers. And the consultations that we carried out when we were developing the guidance, when we spoke to children and their carers, showed that they often have quite different priorities. So just to flag that as well as engaging kinship carers, is also important to involve children. So there's a number of different ways in which kinship carers can contribute to efforts to support kinship care families. At the very least, it's vital to consult kinship carers when developing programmes or policies to make sure that these are relevant to their needs. It's also really important that kinship carers work in partnership with social workers and others to try and resolve the problems that they face. Evidence shows that using a strength-based partnership approach is much more successful in solving the challenges faced in kinship carers families than using a more kind of controlling or directive approach where social workers are telling kinship carers what they should be doing. Kinship carers can be really effective campaigners for change. For example, in the UK, the NGO Kinship has established a campaign called the Value Our Love campaign, which is encouraging the government and others to take more urgent action to support kinship care, and has, I think, been quite instrumental in pushing kinship care up the agenda. And this has a strong focus on involving kinship carers in doing things like writing to politicians, signing petitions, sharing demands via social media, etc. And Kinship Care Ireland are going to talk a bit about their role in campaigning and the very effective way that kinship carers there have managed to campaign for change. There are many examples from a number of different contexts on the value of peer-to-peer support groups. That's kinship carers coming together to support one another. They can provide practical support, they can provide emotional support, guidance on things like resolving parenting dilemmas, and also, as I think probably Blessing will speak about in relation to FOST work, can help each other with poverty alleviation and livelihood support, for example, through revolving loan schemes. There is quite a lot of evidence to show that this kind of peer-to-peer exchange between kinship carers is much more valuable than telling kinship carers how they should be parenting. Kinship carers have often very experienced parents themselves, and they don't really like that interference in their family life, but they do like a chance to discuss the dilemmas and problems that they face with other kinship carers. And both YCDA in India and FOST in Zimbabwe are going to share their experiences on these peer-to-peer support groups later on in the webinar. So kinship carers can form part of the volunteer or professional workforce that is there to support kinship carers. For example, they could help man helplines, or help more experienced kinship carers can help to actually run the peer-to-peer support groups. They can make home visits and flag up problems that kinship care families are facing to professional social workers where needed. And many kinship carers also have many of the skills that would be of value as professional social workers. So that's also an avenue that they can take. And finally, it's of course important to involve kinship carers in the evaluation of interventions. I'm just going on to the next slide around why we should support kinship carers to contribute. So it enhances the quality and relevance of programmes. As I mentioned already, they can be really powerful advocates for change. We've seen that with kinship care, as with other areas of trying to achieve policy change, there's many different ways that you can convince decision makers about why they should change and why change should happen. But there is quite a lot of evidence to suggest that hearing directly from kinship carers about their stories and experiences can be really especially effective. Kinship carers can help identify other kinship care families, so they might know of the grandparents or the aunts and uncles in their village or community that are also looking after children and can be brought into programmes. And of course, they understand what other kinship carers are going through and can effectively support one another. In some contexts, there's quite a lot of mistrust from kinship carers of the professional social workforce, perhaps because they don't want that interference in family life. Perhaps they feel let down by social workers in the past. They're fearful that if they admit to the problems that they're facing to social workers, then children will be taken away. or they might come from a group that's traditionally been discriminated against and mistreated within the social welfare system. So that makes them more mistrustful. And this mistrust means that they can be much more receptive to an approach from a fellow kinship carer than a professional social worker. So that can be a better avenue for them to receive support. Thank you. I'll hand back over to Gemma now.
Thanks, Emily. That's been a really useful introduction to the issues. So I'm going to move ahead to Katrina now to get to hear about some of their experiences in Ireland.
Thanks very much, Gemma. As Gemma said, I'm a kinship carer to my 4 nieces. My husband Seamus and I care for them over the last 10 years. And I just felt it would be useful to talk a little bit about how kinship carers as self-advocates. The learning series has really informed a lot of our learning. We've been really inspired by the work of Family for Every Child. So I really appreciate the opportunity to share our story with you. Next slide, please. So here's a little bit about me. I live in Galway in the west of Ireland on the Atlantic coast. You can see from the map there, Ireland's generally a very green country because we get a lot of rain, but actually it's quite beautiful at the moment. My husband Seamus and I are kinship carers to my 4 nieces following the death of their parents due to bereavement. We care for my sister Una's 4 daughters. So Una is on the left of the photograph. I'm one of triplets. I'm actually in the center, and my other sister Ursula is on the right-hand side. Next slide, please. So this was our family 11 years ago. You have Una and her 4 beautiful daughters there, then aged 8, 10, 12 and 14. Una was a theatre nurse who was widowed when the children were very young and moved to Galway from the south of Ireland to be close for support. My husband Seamus and I are there with our 2 children who are then aged 10 and 13. Next slide, please. So sadly, in August 2012, Una died suddenly, and our family of 4 became a family of 8. So our son and daughter and 4 nieces. But also our nieces came with 6 pets, 2 cats, 2 rabbits and 2 budgies, and never underestimate the powerful therapeutic power of having pets in the household. We've had a lot of fun with all my nieces' pets, and they've really helped us on our journey. Next slide, please. So when we became a kinship family, I had lots of questions about what kind of family we were. I became aware that we were testamentary guardians because we were named as guardians in my sister's will. We were caring for orphans because both their parents were deceased, but we weren't foster carers and we weren't adoptive parents. So we were a type of blended family. And when I found the term kinship care, it was a really striking moment for me. Next slide, please. It was a light bulb moment because I realized that we were no longer alone. Kinship to me feels like a big community. It speaks to me of continuity, of care, of culture, appropriateness. And it means that we don't feel alone. This is a beautiful mosaic from Kinship Carers in Liverpool, and it always reminds me that out there that there's such a large community of support, and we've learned so much from other kinship organisations in Northern Ireland and in the UK, Kinship and Kinship Carers UK, and wider afield. And being part of Family for Every Child learning series has indicated to us that there's huge learning from the global community of kinship carers. And that we can see then that there's such a diversity in the solutions that are offered to families, in the fact that carers themselves can be really part of the solution and identify ways forward. Next slide, please. So my nieces would often ask me, growing up, where would we be if you and Seamus didn't step in and step up to care for us? And it really highlights the benefits of kinship care, because had they not come to us, they could have been split up as siblings. They could have been sent to, to other places, to other families and unrelated foster carers. And so the benefits of kinship care are that it allows children to live with people they know and they trust. It creates a greater chance of siblings being kept together and creates that sense of stability and continuity. My nieces knew us. They had spent a lot of time in our company when my sister needed some respite or when she was ill. And also their sense of identity was preserved because they could always ask about their parents. We knew when their birthdays were, particular anniversaries, even the type of foods they liked, and the type of hobbies and struggles they also might have had themselves. So we knew a lot more about them. Next slide, please. But with kinship care comes a lot of challenges. And because we were informal kinship carers, we were outside of any formal structures. So informal kinship carers and the children they look after are still an overlooked group who experience high levels of poverty and disadvantage with little or no statutory support. So many of the challenges we were faced by the kinship community, including grief and trauma, because kinship care most often occurs in a crisis. My sister died suddenly, and that trauma is carried by the family and by the children in particular. And also, I suppose, moving from a family of 4 to a family of 8, that for our birth children, for our son and daughter, those changes were quite significant and challenging. We also experienced issues around financial support and access to therapeutic services for the children. And then as we were now caring for 6 children, I had to give up my work as a family support worker. And that again has financial implications. Both of our houses, my sister's home and our home, were too small for a family of 8. So we had to move house a number of times and also change our car for a big blue minibus. So lots of challenges in terms of addressing the needs of the children around schooling and around therapy. Next slide, please. So when I found the term kinship care, I realized that it had very, very little profile in Ireland, and that our family were an invisible family type. And because we were in the informal space, that there was a two-tier system of care and of supports for our children who are without adequate parental care. I also realized that there was a lack of policy and a lack of specialized information and supports for kinship families. Ireland has a population of over 5 million. We're a small country, but yet there are estimated in the region of 12,000 children in kinship care in Ireland. Next slide, please. So this is a snapshot of the formal sector for kinship care, for children in kinship care in Ireland. We have over 1.2 million children in Ireland, and of those, over 5,500 are in formal care, in foster care, in relative care, or in residential care. And of those, over 1,500, nearly 1,500 are in relative kinship foster care. So those are families where the carers have been assessed, the relatives, the grannies, the aunts have been assessed, and they would be in receipt of a wide suite of supports. We don't know exactly how many children are in informal kinship care, but we are aware of those who have availed of the orphans payment or guardians payment, and that's in the region of 2,600 children. But there are many, many more families that are not aware of this payment or that are not entitled to this payment because there are living birth parents who are not present for the children, and the grandparents, the aunts, the uncles, the sisters have stepped in. Next slide, please. So my motivation for setting up Kinship Care Ireland was because of our lived experience. Our recognition that the families like ours needed support for kinship care, and hearing the stories of other carers, of other grandparents who'd stepped in to care for grandchildren, other sisters that had and uncles that had stepped in for relatives following either substance misuse, imprisonment, or bereavement. And these stories signified to me that there was huge potential for change and huge potential for the power of a story to be used. These stories that I heard triggered kind of an advocate in me that, that what I was advocating for in setting up kinship care was more than just accommodations, support, or information. It was also advocating for improving people's quality of life And I think when you realize the impact that you're having as a carer and sharing and encouraging other carers to share their story, you realize that there is so much to do and that you're motivated to keep going. Next slide, please. So good stories compel people to change. And I spent a lot of time traveling between Galway and Dublin. It's a 2.5-hour journey up and back. So I would attend conferences and seminars, and I got very good at coffee queue networking, where you meet people who are potential stakeholders and tell them your story. And what I realized that stories demand emotional investment because they change the way we feel. They pique the interest of those who you're telling the story to, and in turn you may change the way they think and the way they act around kinship care. So stories bring an energy to the message, and stories can cause us to take action in the way we behave. So when I spoke with people about kinship care, they hadn't heard the term. They had heard the term maybe friends care or relatives care or relative foster care, but the term kinship care they hadn't heard. And to me, it indicated, because there was a global community, that the term needed to be more widely used. Indeed, a researcher once said to me, but Katrina, kinship care isn't in our vernacular. It's not being used in policy. But when I was able to explain that we were part of a bigger global family of kinship care, then they realized that actually kinship care is embedded in other countries in terms of policy and procedures. Next slide, please. So there's a huge potential of kinship carers' voices to be heard because it's an authentic voice. It speaks of lived experience. It has huge impact and great potential because it builds a case studies of lived experience. And as Emily mentioned, it's the carers themselves that can identify the areas for change. And in telling stories, we also recognise the diversity of kinship carers. I mentioned that our experience was because of bereavement, but other carers have experienced substance use, imprisonment, abandonment, or illness and mental health issues. So in talking about developing kinship carers' stories and sharing their stories, we work towards developing a team of kinship experts. Next slide, please. Because kinship families and kinship children and young people have walked the walk. They've been on the journey of kinship care. They've seen what the challenges are. So if we recognise that kinship carers, the children and young people, are experts by experience, it means that their lived experience of kinship care is valued. When people hear stories of kinship care, they can then become champions of kinship care, and they can use these stories to advocate for greater supports for kinship carers. And in turn, kinship carers then feel supported, respected, and listened to. But kinship carers need a supportive space to do this. They need the recognition that their stories often come from a place of trauma. They often come from a place of bereavement and grief and loss. So need additional supports to be able to tell their stories. But in developing a process of kinship families telling their stories, it can have powerful impact. Next slide, please. So Kinship Care Ireland started that journey. We engaged with kinship families and kinship children. We formulated a strategic plan. We consulted and sat around the table and spoke about what kinship care means to us. We also spoke with stakeholders who took an interest in the journeys that kinship carers make and their needs for support. Next slide, please. So Kinship Care Ireland was established in 2019 and were hosted by TROR, who are a well-established national organisation that support unmarried parents and modern families. In being hosted by TROR, it enabled us to access funding from the TUSLA, the Child and Family Agency, from Social Entrepreneurs Ireland, and also from another foundation called the Catherine Howard Foundation. Next slide, please. So Kinship Care Ireland's vision is that every child, young person and family in kinship care are supported to reach their full potential. And our mission is that through the provision of information, support, services, and advocating for change, we promote the recognition, the rights and entitlements of kinship families. Next slide, please. So what we've achieved to date, we've consulted with children and young people and with kinship carers around the needs of families and identifies areas for change. We've developed a strategic plan and sourced funding for a full-time project coordinator, and also in turn raised awareness around the needs of kinship families with both statutory and community-based agencies. We've had a Youth Voices project, which has been extremely powerful in capturing the voices of children in kinship care, because children in kinship care don't identify themselves as being in kinship care. They see themselves within the family, with their grandparent, with their auntie, with their big sister or brother. So in identifying the experiences of children in kinship care, we've really been on a journey to see the powerful needs of children and young people. And what they say to us is nothing about us without us, or what they would also say is talk with us, not about us or not for us. So that idea of engaging with children has been really, really powerful experience for us as an organisation, capturing those voices. And for kinship carers, through the pandemic, we organised online peer support and self-care workshops. And through our website, we have an information service and a phone line, and have supported numerous kinship carers. Next slide, please. So in looking at the rights and entitlements of children and young people and families in kinship care, we've looked to the UN guidelines on alternative care for children, which speaks very strongly on kinship care, both formal and informal, and its benefits. So in doing so, we've raised awareness with kinship care with the Ombudsman for Children in Ireland and other stakeholders vested in children's rights. And in April this year, the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child recommended that the Irish government develop a policy on the rights of children in informal kinship care. And this has been a huge step forward for us in Ireland, in that the government now are looking at developing a policy for the invisible families in informal kinship care, so that the voice of the carers and the children of the young people do have an incredible impact in changing things. Next slide, please. So that in a small way, you can never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, that's the only thing that ever has. So that engaging kinship families as self-advocates does create change. Next slide, please. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Katrina, for both sharing your professional but also your personal experiences and learning. It's incredibly valuable. Right, I'm going to change into Blessing. Blessing, welcome.
Thanks, Gemma. I'm happy to be here today, sharing with you. So yeah, I'm with an organization called FOST, and we have been supporting families in kinship care for over 20 years now. Initially, we used to support children in kinship care as compared to supporting families in kinship care. Then we realized that it didn't work. We really needed to support the whole family, you know, for the children to experience that love, to experience that adequate care and support. And as an organization, we believe that orphaned and vulnerable children, they actually have greater opportunities of achieving their full potential when they are actually taken care of in the environment where they are familiar with. And we discourage, you know, sibling separation, so that they grow up, you know, with their brothers and sisters in the environment that they will know the culture that is within that environment. So today I'm going to be sharing with you how our community-based mutual support groups and dialogues are helping to improve care for children and families in kinship care in the farming communities in Zimbabwe. You can move on to the next slide. So yeah, maybe just to give you a brief of a background on kinship care in Zimbabwe. In Zimbabwe, you'd realize that kinship care remains informal. The vast majority of kinship care placements, they continue to be informal. And we actually have challenges that are usually caused by the impact of HIV, migration, displacement, unemployment, and poverty. Often children are often exposed to neglect, abuse, exploitation as a result of the poverty backgrounds. We have realized that most of the children and the families that we are supporting in kinship care, they come from poor backgrounds, and this has later exposed them to things like neglect, abuse, and exploitation. And this increased vulnerability also poses an enormous strain on extended families and overwhelm conventional child protection options due to the limited social services infrastructure. So you'd realize that the model being informal is not getting as much as support that is supposed to be getting, either from the government or from the organizations that are supporting vulnerable households, because it's taken as an informal way of taking care of the children. So even if you look at the policies, we really do not have policies that adequately support children and families that are within kinship care. So when you place another child, into a household that is already has a background, that is affected by poverty, you will be actually straining, that family. So we're having challenges that these extended families at the end of the day, they are being, strained because they are getting a burden on top of a burden that they've already been having, in terms of trying to take care of the children due to issues such as poverty, HIV and AIDS, and unemployment. Then if you look at, again, the situation that we have in Zimbabwe in terms of the figures, it is estimated that over 94% of orphaned and vulnerable children are living under kinship care. And of these 94%, over 60% of the orphans and vulnerable children, they're actually being nurtured by grandparent-headed households, which even makes the children more vulnerable because they are being taken care of by grandparents who are even struggling, to take care of themselves. Next slide, please. So there are many challenges. I think my former colleague actually highlighted some of these challenges that are being faced by households that are taking care of children under the model of kinship care. So we have got many challenges in this type of care, and they're actually compounded by the fact that kinship care is largely informal. And these challenges actually, they range from economic, social, and we also have personal difficulties, both on the part of the caregiver and the children. But maybe zeroing in down to the caregivers, you'd realize that we have issues to do with poverty, issues to do with financial strain, trauma that is caused by beginning of a new parenting cycle, whereby mostly when we are talking about grandparents, because like I've highlighted earlier on, that most of the children are being taken care of by grandparents. So the grandparents, they've gone through their cycle of parenting, decades ago. And you'd realize that now in this century, they're being asked again, to start that cycle of parenting, children in this century, which creates a lot of challenges because of issues to do with generational gaps. Then we also have physical incapacitation of carers due to ill health and old age. Then we also have behavioral problems amongst the children who are actually receiving care. This then ties up with the issue to do with generational gaps. Like currently, we have been having high numbers of children within kinship care who have been reported, to be engaging in drug abuse. And, for grandmothers, to be able to handle this, they've been experiencing a lot of challenges in trying to handle this. Then we also have lack of adequate social protection systems, which also creates challenges, for caregivers to provide care and support to these children. All these factors would then lead to burnout and incapacitation of the caregivers to provide adequate care and protection for orphaned and vulnerable children. Next slide, please. So what we have done as an organization in trying to respond to some of these challenges that I've highlighted above, we have a number of strategies that we have put in place, and today I'm going to be sharing two of the strategies. One which looks at mutual support groups, and the other one which talks about a community engagement through community dialogues. So with mutual support groups, we have established what we call community-based support groups called self-help groups. And basically these groups, you know, they are largely made up of women and grandparents. So we have other groups that are made of just grandmothers only. And we have other groups that are made up of a mixture of grandmothers and women. And we also have other groups that are a mixture of men and women. Basically, these groups are actually set up within the community by the communities themselves. So they are the ones that decide who is supposed to be part of their groups. And each group has got a membership of about between 15 to 20 members. And these groups, they meet regularly in the community to conduct household economic strengthening activities, to have spaces where they can provide each other with moral support, and also to have spaces where they can actually have life skills trainings, you know, amongst themselves. So with economic strengthening activities, what we have been doing with these women, they are doing what we call income savings and lending projects, where they come together and they bring a certain amount of money that they agree as capital in the group. Like, let's say, for instance, they agree that they will be investing $5 every month. So each individual will be expected to bring $5 every month. Each time they meet, they invest that $5. So let's say, for an example, there are 20 in their groups. So that day when they invest $5 each member, they will come up with $100 at the end of the day. And that $100 is expected that the group members, one or two of the group members, should borrow that money. It should not remain, you know, with the treasurer or the secretary. That money should be borrowed by, you know, by any of the members, so that they take that money and go and use it, you know, to start up a business. Because what we have done with the members of these groups, we've encouraged each member to have a small business, to start a small business. Because one of the things that we realized as an organization, because we used to pay like school fees for children who are within these households. And, you know, as time went on, most of the donors, they are no longer interested in paying things like school fees for children, because they believe that is the responsibility of the government to take care of its own children. So you'd realize we reduced the number of children that we were supporting. So these kinds of projects then help, you know, these households to then pay for things like school fees for their own children. So back to the investment. So we want them to borrow the money so that they go and invest it within their businesses. And then the proceeds that they get from the businesses are the ones that they then use to come back and pay back the loan. You know, when they do the loan repayments, we expect that they'll be using the proceeds or the profits that they get from them, from the businesses. And when they meet in the next meeting, those who would have borrowed, you know, will be repaying their loans, and they will be again reinvesting. They bring again their $5. So you'd realize the capital for this group keeps on growing each time they meet. So by the end of the year, you'd realize that the members of the group will then be able to borrow. Let's say, for instance, in the beginning, you were able to borrow $50. You know, after 6 months or a year, you should be able to borrow something like $400 from the investment of the group. This means that you are then able to go and invest that money into your business. So we expect your business to be also growing, and you'll be also getting, you know, more profit to take care of the needs of the children, you know, within your households. So we have seen women using the proceeds from the businesses that they have been doing through the self-help group approach to pay for school fees for their children, to buy for the basic needs that are needed on a day-to-day, you know, for the children and for their survival. So currently we are supporting over 150 groups in 5 districts, which are reaching over 2,500 women. And we have seen this as a sustainable way of empowering families, you know, to take care of their own children. So they don't just look at financial activities, you know, when they come together in these mutual support groups. They also look at issues to do with parenting, you know, life skills. We have sessions where they talk about the challenges that they are facing, you know, in taking care of the children. And within the groups, they try and then provide each other with advice on how they can tackle, you know, some of the challenges that they are facing, you know, in trying to provide adequate care and support to these children. And you'd realize that sometimes they might not have questions to the challenges that they are facing. So what they do is they then bring in, you know, our social workers to provide them with technical support when it is needed. Then also these mutual support groups have actually transformed into moral support spaces for the women and the caregivers, you know, within the communities, where they'll be sharing, you know, the same problems that they are having in trying to take care of the children within the kinship care setup. Next slide, please. So we also have community dialogues where we are trying to engage communities, looking at the journey of life, you know, for children, particularly the OVCs. So we use what we call the Journey of Life Toolkit, which has got series of workshops, you know, that are structured to create discussions, you know, within the communities, so that we talk about, you know, the journey of life for a child, you know, from birth, you know, until adulthood. You know, we look at the challenges that the child, you know, faces from birth up until adulthood. What kind of support does a child need, you know, for them to, you know, to develop to their full potential with the challenges that are contextual that they'll be facing, you know, within the communities. So communities sit down and they actually discuss, you know, the contextual challenges that, you know, children within their communities are facing. And at the end of the discussions, they come up with community action plans, you know, that will be looking at how they are going to respond as a community in trying to address, you know, the challenges that the children in their communities are facing. It could be, let's say, for an example, within the communities, the children are facing a problem with drug abuse. Then they try and look at the root causes of drug abuse, you know, within their communities. And then they then agree on the strategies that they as a community are going to, you know, put in place so that they can curb, you know, this problem within their communities. And we have seen these dialogues, you know, helping us to reinforce the community and to reinforce the community and positive parenting skills within the communities. You'd realize that with the challenges, you know, that communities have been facing because of HIV, poverty, you know, community parenting was kind of being eroded. But with these discussions, you know, we've been able to, you know, to talk about, you know, the importance of community parenting and the importance of positive parenting, you know, for orphaned and vulnerable children. And these dialogues have also helped us to expose the challenges that are contextually faced by the children in the community, you know, for them to reach their full potential. Next slide, please. Then in terms of the achievements that we've had so far with these strategies or approaches that we're implementing as an organization, we've realized that through the self-help group approach, these groups that are being formed within the communities, you know, by the women, the grandmothers, you know, the fathers and the mothers together, they've actually become a source of moral and peer support for the women within the community, which has really helped in terms of improving the mental health and well-being, you know, of the caregivers within kinship care. Then we have also managed to establish a movement of caregivers within the communities that has been engaging with the local stakeholders to demand for social, economic, and political rights, because we are empowering them instead of them just waiting for FOST to come and support them. You know, we are looking at other resources, you know, that are within the communities, and then we then capacity build them so that they're able to approach, let's say, is the district administrator's office. If there is any support that they can get from that office, we capacitate them so that they'll be able to engage, you know, with such offices, you know, within their communities to get, you know, it could be the social, economic, and political rights that they're supposed to be getting to support their children. Then we've also been able to establish, you know, community banks for caregivers within the support groups. You'd realize these people that we are talking about, these are very poor people, and they don't have any collateral that they can use, you know, to borrow money, you know, from formal institutions such as banks. But, you know, with these strategies, you know, they've been able to kind of come up with their own small banks, you know, within the communities. I remember at one point in time in Zimbabwe, we had shortages of cash in banks. And, you know, we would be overwhelmed each time we would visit these women, you know, and they would be, you know, doing their savings. You know, they actually had the cash that we couldn't find, you know, in the towns, in the banks. But within the community, you know, they had the cash readily available because of these activities that they are doing. Then we have also been able to establish small to medium businesses with the caregivers. And this has really helped in terms of improving household economic strengthening for them to be able to sustainably provide for their own children and families with basic needs, such as food, school fees, and clothes. Then some of the caregivers, they've actually managed to construct and expand, you know, their accommodation facilities. You know, we're talking about child abuse. And one of the things that led to child abuse, particularly in the farming communities, was the nature of the accommodation that they have, where you'd find maybe one family sharing only one room, you know, adults sharing, you know, one room with maybe 3, 4, 5 children. And this would actually lead to, you know, abuse of children, be it sexual abuse of children. So what we've managed to do, you know, within these groups is to, you know, encourage the women and the families to expand their accommodation facilities. And they've actually used, you know, the proceeds from the activities that they are doing within these groups to expand their accommodation facilities. And women have also become safety nets for their children within their communities, because, you know, they're being taught about child protection within these spaces, and they've become advocates for children within the communities. Then we've been able to develop community-based response plans, which we then follow up as an organization to see whether communities are you know, following through with the plans that they would have set for themselves. And if they have challenges, we then come in to provide, you know, the technical support maybe that they might be needing for them to, you know, to have those plans accomplished. Then we have also seen an improvement in terms of positive parenting and reinforcement of community parenting. Next slide, please, Gemma. So yeah, as an organization, these are some of the strategies that we are implementing. We have a number, but yeah, we are seeing great improvement in terms of sustainability, in terms of care and support for children who are orphaned and vulnerable, who are being taken care of kinship care. Next slide, please. So yes, thank you very much for listening. Those are my details for if you need to engage further. Thank you very much, Gemma.
Thanks, Blessing. That's been really a helpful example in terms of understanding the specifics of how you implement a program around mutual support learning and community dialogue. So thank you. I'm going to move across to Subrata from India. Welcome, Subrata.
Hi, and good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I thank you very much for introducing me and giving an opportunity to sharing our learnings in the context of gatekeeping. First of all, I like to tell you that YCDA, about YCDA. YCDA is a pioneer organization in India who works for the families and children, providing alternative care options and family strengthening. We help the children who reintegrated in the families and work at the community level to prevent child separation from the families by using the proper gatekeeping mechanism. If we think of what gatekeeping, then we must think what is the need to talk about gatekeeping. Let me tell that in the recent past experiences, we have observed that a strong commitment of child protection workforce is working for the family-based care for children. From the field of experiences and many study researchers, given a clear picture that how the institutional environment creates negative impact on children who live in a impersonal residential care for the period of short time. They are totally disconnected from the families, guardian, culture, relationship, and many more. Then we think why the children having families and those who have kin, why they are separated from this family. What need to be done to prevent these vulnerabilities, and so this gatekeeping comes. Next slide, please. We all know that in Indian context, these are the policy framework to address the child protection domain. So these are some of it. I am not going to detail into it, but already all know the context of India. Next slide, please. Now I am going to explain little bit about the gatekeeping and its function. Many of us know that gatekeeping is a systematic procedure to ensure that alternative forms of childcare for children who are used only necessary and child needs suitable support to meet the individual needs. This is also carried out in JJ Act and also in recent Mission Vatshalya scheme. It means in child protection and continuum of care, the gatekeeping refers to keeping as a watch and ensuring that vulnerable families and children identify at the early stages, at the entry point, that is at the community level. One is and another is the child welfare committee level. And as per the assessment and appropriate need, they link to various services and prevent them from separation. And if we look after the process of gatekeeping, then we can say that the effective gatekeeping system prevents the children from unnecessary separation from the families, and it helps the children to reintegrate in the families and back to their families. Next slide, please. It also helps the community and organization who care for the children to make the decision through the commitment and informed process. And if we see the mechanism in the Indian context, then based on these functions of gatekeeping, there are different mechanisms available from top to bottom. That is the NCPCR, that is National Commission for Protection of Children. Then we have the state level Child Protection Committee. Then we have the district level Child Protection Committee, and simultaneously in block level, panchayat level, and village level. Apart from this structure, YCDA also promoted other informal bodies, like we have also created a caregiver association in the community level. We are worked through the self-help group that already former colleague already explained about the self-help group, who are also acting as a gatekeeper. Next slide, please. If we see the function of the gatekeeping, then it is divided into 3 levels. And we see that the gatekeeping happens for, and it effectively functional. If we see the first one, that is the primary community level, where intervention normally made in the early stages, it is possible through the capacity building of the community persons, activation of the structures and local bodies, as they are the first contact person of the families who are in vulnerable circumstances. So normally we go through this contact person, and through the family strengthening intervention, the family identify at risk, they can do the assessment and can link with the different services at the community level. If we go through the second level of the gatekeeping, then it is the child welfare committee level. Once the child is placed before the child welfare committee, then initially the assessment can be done, taking the situation of the families and children, and during the counseling, any concern like the family economic condition, education, absence of proper health services, this type of needs can identify, and with the prior to the statutory body, that is the child welfare committee, given the valuable inputs, whether the child to be separated from the families or placed in alternative care options, or approach can be taken to addressing or reducing the risks of the families, so that the child be remain in the same families and with their parents. So the CWC also supports the family to linking them with the social protection scheme, scheme of the government, and also ensuring the child to be in family with regular monitoring and follow-up mechanism. If we see the third, then it will be where the child is placed in alternative care options or in CCI. So in this, we can ensure the reunification of the children to the families, and after reunification, we have to check out to prevent it from re-separation. So these are the three levels of gatekeeping. Next slide, please. So if we look upon the community level, YCDA as an organization first targeted to the first level of gatekeeping, and that is the village level gatekeeping. We form a structure taking the community representative from the community representative as a leader, children, youth volunteers, women group, and other who act as a active gatekeeper to address the child protection issues in the villages. If we see next slide, please. If we see the function of the village child protection committee, then the responsibility of this structure are focusing towards the core issue that they identify, and mapping the child protection issues, create a safety net for the children. They do the awareness building and the importance to be a family, or the role of families for a children. They raise to combat child trafficking, prevent child marriages, child labor practices, and also promoting various best practices like the child birth certificate or the Aadhaar identity card, and also linking the families to family strengthening through the service delivery structures, and simultaneously do the monitoring and follow-up, and linking them to the district level services for the strengthening of the families. During the, as per our experiences in village child protection committee, effort towards gatekeeping is that the child has identified the families who are at risk due to the lack of access to services, or poverty, or the child without parental or the school dropout children, and these the vulnerable children and the families have been assessed as per their child development needs, the parenting capacities of the families, and the career option available in the communities. The village child protection also initiate the convergence and coordination meetings with the government department and services, organizing the different camps to raise the awareness to be placed the child in a families, and also simultaneously time to time do the capacity building of the community involving the volunteer teachers, children, so that they can perform their role more effectively and efficiently. with all these initiatives, Village Child Protection Committee also check the migration children, and they produce before the Child Welfare Committee for the short-term arrangement of the children, and they place the children in the kinship care arrangement, where they can regularize the school children to the school, or they can give the support to the carers, kinship carers, to take care of the children. They monitor regularly so that the child be in a family in a safe environment. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Already. Looking after all this, in spite of all these mechanisms, still we have some challenges to address the child protection issues. However, as per our experiences in implementing the gatekeeping, there will be some area need to more work, like the local body need to be more empowered, so that they can become functional and be run in a sustainable way. Secondly, their need of local generate the local fund, so that if any families or any children found at risk, they can the community can support in the emergency aspect, and prevent the unnecessary family separation. And thirdly, if all levels of this mechanism works, then it build the child, it build a safety net for the child in the community. And lastly, there should be many different care options available at community level, so that the community mechanism decide the children to be in a kinship carer, or to be in a foster carer, to be in a family, to grow in a family for their development. So at last, next slide, please. At last, I should say that safeguarding children is everybody's responsibility, and to be in a family, it may be foster care or kinship care. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Subrata. It's been really interesting to hear about your model of community gatekeeping and how this really benefits kinship care families and children. So thank you. I'd like to thank all of our panelists today, Katrina, Blessing, Subrata and Emily, for sharing your extensive knowledge and experience. And I'm now going to open up for questions. So I'd encourage all of those of you in the room today to post your questions in the Q&A box. And this is an opportunity for our panelists to expand on some specific areas of their work. To kick us off, I think there was a question that's already come through around, put it up. There was a question that came through specifically, I think this is going to go for Subrata, so it was very specific to India. So somebody was saying it would be good if kinship care could start in India as well, because they could identify some good families who would keep at least one child in need of care and protection. How can others help support kinship carers to contribute more efficiently? I think that question's for you in the Indian context.
If I answer this question in Indian context, then if I am not wrong, that still there are children in kinship care in India, and if we see the report, then it at least 3% of children are in kinship care arrangement. But though it is in informal setting, as there is no formal guideline in India to support the kinship care, but still the children are in kinship care. When they lost their parents, they automatically come to the nearby relative, and the nearby relative are taking care of the children. So this practice is already going in kinship care. Thank you.
Thank you. So another question that's come through is looking to understand the difference between foster care and kinship care, which one? Emily?
Yeah, sure, I can take that one.
For that one.
Thank you. It's a good question. So this is according to the guidelines for the alternative care of children, which were welcomed by the UN back in 2009. And that defines foster care as a formalised arrangement where the children are brought up in another family, not their own family, and it's sort of regulated and assessed and monitored and supported by social workers. So it's a much more formalised arrangement than kinship care. In those guidance, kinship care and foster care are seen as something different. Foster care is something where children are looked after by outside of their own family, by strangers effectively. However, in reality, in many countries across the world, South Africa, many countries, you can be a kinship foster carer. And that is like a formalised form of kinship care. So that's when children are being looked after by relatives or friends of the family, somebody that they know, but that kinship care arrangement is being monitored and supported and regulated by social services and by the government. So I hope that answers the question.
Emily. So the next one is a question for Blessing. There's somebody specifically looking to understand how they can partner with FOST on kinship care. So maybe, Blessing, it might be worth resharing your contact details in the chat as you had done in your presentation, and then they can get in touch directly. Another question here for both Blessing and Subrata is the community work in Zimbabwe and India funded by the government or funded by other donors? How integrated is informal kinship care into national child welfare systems? Subrata?
Maybe I could go first.
Sure, Blessing, go first, yeah.
Yeah, so we, like what Emily has just highlighted, that, you know, when kinship care is then formalized, it kind of becomes foster, because it's a system that would have gone through the court systems. But when we look at informal kinship care, this is support that is being given to children that hasn't gone through any sort of court decision. Challenges, I think, even up to now as an organization, we are actually having an advocacy program where we are trying to, you know, to liaise with the government, to advocate that the government, you know, recognizes kinship care. And I think we are actually, I can say we are actually on track. Just recently, we have reviewed, you know, the orphan care policy that we had in Zimbabwe, which looked at specifically support for orphaned and vulnerable children, so that it could, you know, speak to, you know, models of care such as kinship care. And the first draft that we have seen that has been developed actually has kinship care, you know, as the first option in terms of placement of children who need care. So yeah, I think we are currently in Zimbabwe. We are in the right direction, and we are now trying to finalize that draft. I know very soon we are going to be visiting with the government. We have planned a visit where we are going to visit Kenya and Rwanda, so that we could actually learn from their alternative care policies that they have, so that we can then come back and input into our policy that is currently in draft form. Yeah.
Thanks, Blessing. Subrata, did you have anything to add?
No, already I have mentioned that in India the government is not recognizing the kinship care, but in the preventive perspective, we can also link the children to the government, so that the preventive sponsorship scheme linked to the families, and the government can support the children for the education and other needs.
Thank you. So our next question here is from the Philippines. So kinship care refers to the placement of children with relatives or extended family members when they cannot live with their parents. In the Philippines, kinship care faces several challenges, Lack of legal recognition and support. Kinship care arrangements in the Philippines often lack formal legal recognition and support. This can lead to challenges in accessing social services, healthcare, education, and financial assistance for children. The absence of a formal legal framework can also make it difficult for kinship caregivers to make important decisions on behalf of the children. How can we address this? Any of our panelists have some immediate responses to that? Katrina, yes, please.
Yeah, it's interesting that in Ireland we face the similar issue that informal carers who are outside the legal framework have difficulties around making decisions, and by addressing the needs through looking at policy, that's something we're really hoping for, that those issues can be addressed. I mean, there are many issues, but I think a first step is maybe to see how the government would recognise that informal carers exist, and that there are a percentage of children that are outside of the care system that do need supports, and that under the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child that they are entitled to this support. And it's something that we're using as an argument with the government, that the government are in breach of their responsibilities under the convention. So it's a long road. It's not the easiest path to take in addressing policy, but it's the only way in achieving long-term change. And I think if you have somebody like Children's Rights or an ombudsman to start with them, that they could look at the overall issues, and maybe there are families there that can look at the legal implications, because the children need protection and so do the carers. But it's a long road. It takes a lot of time to change policy. I hope that helps.
Yeah, definitely.
But it's worth doing. It takes a long time, but it's worth doing. It's really important. But you need energy and champions. So yeah. So I hope that might answer something.
Thank you, Emily. Have you got something to add?
I'm going to try and say something, but my dog is barking in the background, so apologies. Yeah, I totally agree. It's a really good question, and it's a really key dilemma in many parts of the world around the degree to which kinship care should be formalised and how much support to kinship carers should be connected to that formalisation. And many countries have the same problem as the Philippines and Ireland, that there isn't that recognition. So I think probably at the very least, kinship carers need to be able to have that kind of legal recognition of their parental roles and responsibilities, so that there's clarity around which decisions they can make about the child's life and upbringing. But it's important not to take that formalisation too far, because many kinship care families don't want to, for example, have to choose between a child being in kinship care or breaking the ties with their parents, who may only be temporarily unable to look after the child. And many families also don't want the state to be very involved in the child's upbringing, and there isn't always a necessity for that. So it's very important to recognise those kind of more informalised arrangements, and to make sure they're not being kind of penalised by the system, as Katrina has mentioned. Thank you.
Thanks, Emily. Blessing, you also wanted to add.
Yeah, so here in Zimbabwe, I think we've made a decision. We are not comfortable at formalizing the informal kinship care. I think for many reasons, that I think Emily has just highlighted one of the reasons where, the relatives, they need their space. They don't need, a lot of interference, from people coming to say, yeah, we've come to monitor, we've come to do this. They need their space, number one. Then number two, in terms of resources, I think if you notice from my presentation, I've actually highlighted that over 94% of orphaned and vulnerable children in Zimbabwe, they are in the kinship, they're being taken care of in kinship care. So this would then mean that the government would then need, more resources to be able to take care of these children. So formalizing is a bit tricky, but what we have agreed maybe in the engagement that we've been having with the government is, after we have finalized the policy that we are developing right now, we'll then want to come up with guidelines that will then specify, what kind of support, should be given to children in kinship care. Because we have a number of organizations, donors in Zimbabwe, that are supporting families that are within kinship care, but they come in with different packages. So the guidelines would then help us to standardize, in terms of what particular support, should be given to a family in kinship care for us to say that they've been supported. So this is the direction that we are trying to take as Zimbabwe, so that we can clarify, these dilemmas. Yeah.
I was just going to add, I think that this issue is what we encountered through our global research, and it's really what prompted our journey into the development of the interagency guidelines. And really the next stage of that will be to use those guidelines to advocate for better support and better inclusion of kinship care in policy globally, really. So it's a well-recognised issue and encountered in many places, I think. So thank you for that. So our next question is, what would be the difference between formal and informal kinship care? Emily, I know you've mentioned this a little bit already, so I don't know if you want to expand on that a little bit further.
Yeah, so there's multiple different forms of kinship care. So different types of formal kinship care. So kinship care can be formalised really in two main ways. The first way would just be that legal recognition of the kinship carer as having parental responsibility of the child and able to make decisions. And there's lots of different levels and different ways that can be done. And the second way is having social workers and social services kind of involved in the kinship care placement, maybe social workers in the courts involved in the placement and the monitoring and follow-up of kinship care. So there's two different main ways in which it can be formalised. And informal kinship care is just when it's a very informal agreement between family members, and it's by far and away the most common form of kinship care in every context, including in higher income countries, where there's a more formalised social welfare system. Yeah, so I hope that answers that question. And just to say on this issue and the previous question, when you see that we've got a draft of the guidelines ready, and we hopefully provide a link for you that will where you can see it, that both those questions are addressed really kind of head on within that, so you can see answers to that within the guidance that we've developed.
Katrina, would you like to add something? Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that there's also another form of kinship care that sits in between the formal and the informal, which they call in Ireland, another place they call it private family arrangement, which isn't very a comprehensive term, but it's when social workers are involved with families and they see that the grandparent can maybe step up to care for the child, but that the social worker then just leaves the arrangement as an informal arrangement without actually, assessing the family. So these arrangements are of concern because the families obviously have come to the attention of the social workers, and this diversion, so it's been studied in the US around diverting to informal kinship care leaves the families really vulnerable because they don't get the same level of support as those in the formal kinship placements. So, and because in Ireland we have a shortage of foster care placements, there has been a huge increase in this private family arrangement and placement with families and not offering the support, either financial or access to health or legal support. So it's one that's of great concern because it's a legal grey space, like you highlighted, that they don't have the ability to make decisions around health or schooling or other issues. So it fluxes between the informal and formal. So just thought I'd mention that.
Brilliant, thank you very much. So our next question is really about how can the kinship care model be used in a humanitarian setting, especially with UASCs. Now, I'll just quickly add, we have done a whole webinar specifically looking at how kinship care can work in emergency settings. So I would encourage people to go back and look at that because it had some really great examples from the Ukraine and from Lebanon. But is there anybody who would like to respond to this question immediately? Emily?
Yeah, yes, definitely. It can be used in humanitarian settings and with unaccompanied and separated children. In fact, it's the main response to children who are separated from their parents in humanitarian settings. Often it's an informal arrangement made within families or just community members picking up children along the way who become separated from the children taking them in, but it's very widely supported by the UN system in a refugee situation or a conflict situation as kind of the key mechanism really to support children who can't be cared for by parents. And as Gemma says, there's quite a lot of evidence on how to do this. So hopefully when you take a look at the guidance, you'll be able to see that within that.
Thanks, Emily. So I think we've come to the end of our questions. There was a question around whether the guidance will be available in Spanish. Yes, the plan is that the final draft of the guidance will be available in a range of different languages, and Spanish will be one of those. In the meantime, in terms of how to input and review the guidance, please do reach out to us if there are language barriers and language requirements, because we're really keen that it's a practitioner informed process, and that as many practitioners as possible with experience of supporting kinship care are able to input into this process and feedback on the guidance itself, just to ensure it's as useful as possible when it finally gets completed. So if there's no more questions coming through, then I'd like to take this opportunity to again really thank our panelists for joining us today and sharing with us their experiences and their learning from each of their contexts. There will be a poll that should be being launched now. So if everybody could just take a moment to complete that poll, that would be really useful. And again, if you are interested in kinship care or have things to share around kinship care and specific learnings, please do join the Changemakers for Children kinship care community. It's a great space for us all to come together and share different resources and learning and challenges as well. And there'll be more information there about following kind of learning series webinars, and also some of our previous ones as well. So for those of you that were interested in kinship care in emergencies and humanitarian settings, then all of that will be there on that kinship care community as well. And there's also previous webinars looking around these issues of formalization and also how do we define kinship care as well. So just recognizing that that might be of interest for some of those questions that have been coming through today. Our next webinar will be on the 12th of July, and this will be looking at the views of children and caregivers on their support needs, and that will be sharing some of the findings from the consultations that we've recently conducted in a range of different contexts to understand from the children and the caregivers themselves, and inputting into the guidance. So we'll be sharing on what those findings were, and also some of the specifics around how that's then going to guide the guidance itself. And yes, thank you again for everybody that attended today and the panelists. So thank you, and I hope to see you all again in one of our future webinars.